Hi everyone, it's Rachel here from the Shades of Orange, and today I want to do a video essentially talking about the YA books that I read when I was a young adult. Now this video is partially inspired by Katie over at ChapterStackss, who recently did a video all about underrated young adult books. And in her video, essentially all the books she was talking about were books that she read when she was a teenager. So that got me thinking back to the books that I read as a teenager myself. Now I will say this was about 10 some years ago when I was about 15-ish when I was reading these books, and I feel like young adult was a little different back then. These books you'll all find are quite short. I don't remember any 500-page young adult books when I was a teenager, so I feel like the genre's changed a little bit, and I'm not necessarily recommending these books to adults. Personally, I love all these books, but at this point I have all the nostalgia when I go to reread them. So I don't know how well they actually would compare if I were to read them now for the first time, but I just want to talk about them. Maybe you've read these same books and see what you think. Now the first book I want to talk about is actually quite well known. That is Speak by Laurie, Halse, Anderson. And this has actually gotten quite a bit of attention on BookTube, even though it's actually an older book. I think it was written somewhere in the 1990s. Essentially it's about a girl who's going into, I think it's her freshman year of school, and over the summer there were some events that basically caused a huge falling out with her friends. And the course of the book follows her throughout the year as she tries to kind of find her voice, and she's so quiet and doesn't say anything. And this book just, it hit home for me. There was a lot of parallels that I found in my own high school experience, and it just, definitely, I don't want to spoil anything, but the events that happened to her didn't happen to me by any means. But this book came at an important time in my life where I really needed to speak out about some of the injustices and issues that I was running into that I was so afraid to talk about. And this book really empowered me to say what I needed to say at a time in my life when I was so afraid to. So of course this book is a personal favorite of mine. It's still one of my favorite books of all time. And I just think it's such a powerful story that all guys and girls really should be reading in high school. And just is such a good reminder about the importance of speaking out and just having your voice be heard. And it's such a powerful read, extremely quick, but I think this is really going to become a timeless young adult book if it hasn't already. Of all the books I'm going to show you, I'd say this is the book that's worth for sure checking out if you haven't, because I think it's just such a timeless young adult book. And the messages in there are so important to hear. Now the next book I want to talk about is A Door Near Here by Heather Quarles. And this is a book about I think she's a young teenager who essentially is trying to take care of her family because her single mother, essentially is an alcoholic who's basically cannot get out of bed. And it basically follows the young character who is trying to keep her family together, take care of her younger brothers and sisters, and keep anyone from finding out. This book makes a lot of references to the Chronicles of Narnia. Reference to A Door Near Here is essentially a reference to looking for the wardrobe to Narnia. You don't need to have read the Chronicles of Narnia to enjoy this book. It's a very fast-paced read about kind of a young group of kids trying to figure out their own way without kind of getting any help from adults. And it just, it has very good messages at the end. Short read, but I felt it was a very strong young adult book talking about real issues like alcoholism. And very much enjoyed this one. Now the next book I want to talk about is Violet Eyes by Nicole Lucan. And this was one of my very favorite books growing up. I must have read it 100 times from the library. And eventually they ended up selling it, so I actually have the library's only copy. So this might be, I don't believe you can get this in print version anymore, but I do know it's available in e-reader form. And it's hard to say too much about this book without giving away spoilers. So what I would say is that this book follows Violet, and she's very unique because she has violet eyes. And she ends up running into this boy, Michael, who also has violet eyes. And so you kind of have a feeling that there's something special about them. There's something unique that ties them together, but it's not really said. And I'd say this whole book is really, what makes this book so incredible for me is that it's all about things that are unspoken. And I'm trying not to say this, it's just a little cryptic, but you get to the end of the book and you realize everything that wasn't said throughout the book, and it's one of those books that I got to the end and was like, whoa, like the author really took me for a turn, and I didn't see the ending coming, which I absolutely love in books. I don't like it when it's too easy to predict. So I really enjoyed this one. This is the first out of a trilogy. The second is Silver Eyes, and the third is Angel Eyes, which actually just came out for an e-reader now. There was such a fan base that they pushed to get this final third book basically published, and so it's published, I believe, privately by the author and available on e-reader for like $5, which I want to check out because I've never finished this series. I'm so excited because this was one of my all-time favorite reads growing up. I love this book so much. I have such huge feelings of nostalgia for it. Now I want to talk to you about my favorite young adult criminal mystery writer, and that is Norma Clinton. Now I actually own several of her books here, all of which I got from my library. My library sells off all of their books. I do not know what's wrong with them, but I'm glad I got all these. Now she is Canadian, so it might be a little bit hard to get her, get a hold of her books outside of Canada, but they're absolutely fantastic. A couple of my favorites were Mistaken Identity, Body in the Basement, and everything in this series it starts out with Over the Edge, and this is the Chloe and Levesque series. I find they're really gripping books, and I mean they're somewhat dark. I mean they're all murder mysteries, which I found were at the time very dark and compelling to be reading at 15. Just because, yeah, it was in some ways very adult topics, but I thought they were just such quick, fun reads, and they really started my love for criminal fiction, which continues to today. I don't read as much mystery as I used to, but really enjoyed it, and these started it all. So if you can get a hold of any of her books, I just so recommend them. I thought they were just fantastic. Super short reads, but very well done. Like you get clues throughout the book, so you can somewhat figure out what's happening as you go along. And there's very much a good sequence of events, so it's logical why the person who did it eventually, and so you do get that logical steps of figuring that out, which I absolutely love. Now the last two series I want to talk about, I don't have physical copies of, but I just want to make a quick mention because they were also books that I loved. Now the first is the Midnighter series by Scott Westerfeld. Scott Westerfeld is of course more well known for his Ugly series, which I have actually never read. But I found that the Midnighters were more up my alley. It's about a town where there's an actual extra hour in the day that takes place at midnight, and only certain people are actually awake during this hour. Everyone else is essentially frozen in time. Now, and during this hour, all these dark and creepy things and creatures come out, and it's not really scary. I mean, if you're reading Stephen King, this isn't scary at all, but I remember being 15 and reading this at midnight in bed, and I just thought it was just so creepy, and I really enjoyed it at the time. So that's one. If you do like Scott Westerfeld, I would suggest checking those out. I think they were really enjoyable and action-packed. They were a trilogy, and I believe it had a nice arc and finished well, which is always good to know when you're going into a trilogy, that it ends well. Now the other series I want to talk about was The Mediator by Meg Cabot, if I'm saying that right. And that was about a young girl who essentially has the ability to talk to ghosts, and they find her, and it's her job to figure out what they need to have finished in their life in order to move on to heaven or whatever the next stage is. And I thought it was just such a well-written young adult ghost story. It was a little bit creepy at times. Some of the ghosts weren't necessarily friendly ghosts, and there was also a love interest which I was really into. I felt the story ended really well. I think it's like about 6 books long, and I just remember being really happy with the last books. They just got really exciting, and it was just such a good young adult series. So I think that one's still kind of popular, so you might have already heard about that one. If you haven't and you're interested in those kind of ghost stories, I would definitely recommend it. It's got one of those kick-ass characters who she just doesn't put up with a lot, and makes for a very almost irreverent mediator because she just doesn't put up with a lot of crap from ghosts. So those were these were like my favorite books growing up. I'm probably forgetting a couple which I might try to mention in future videos, but those were definitely my prime favorites. Of all those books, I would say my strongest recommendation is Speak by Laurie, Halse, Anderson, just because I feel that one's the most timeless, particularly if you are past those young adult years but you still enjoy reading YA. Otherwise, I'm hoping to do kind of a further second video in a couple weeks, maybe talking about how I transitioned into adult literature and what I'd recommend to make that transition, like what books would be worth kind of when you're trying to sample into adult fiction if you don't read a lot. But otherwise, that's all I have for today. I hope everyone has a good week, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, bye.